Wi-Fi on. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Gaia journey, and welcome back for many of us. Welcome to the new of us who have just joined. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And we know that many of you are still rolling in as we begin here. I'm based in New York. My name is Antoinette, and good morning from New York, and to wherever you may be, maybe good afternoon, good evening, good early morning. And we have a number of Zoom rooms that we're linking to be able to do this today. So we have about 150 in each Zoom room right now. As that number begins to climb, you could type in the chat hello, as many of you are already doing, and where you're coming from, as it kind of gives us a sense of our global community. So welcome, welcome, welcome. We are in interesting times, and this Gaia journey has been set up by the Presencing Institute in order to be able to support the unprecedented changes that we are experiencing as a global community, and to really be able to move through a change process together so that we can start to reimagine our society and civilization in a way that will really work for us and for our planet. So we are very grateful to have a incredible esteemed guest with us today. Vandana Shiva will be joining us, and I'll share with you a little bit about the journey, the overarching journey that we're on, and also share a little bit about what we've been seeing in some of the surveys that we've been doing, which just brings to light some of the data in order for us to start that sense making process. So, over the last few weeks, we've been building that sense making capacity together. Although the research team has quite a wealth of experience in being able to do that for and with us. So, thank you to all who have participated in that beginning of the sense making. We will continue it throughout our 14-week journey. So again, I see many more have joined. So welcome, welcome to all of us, all of you, and we are just beginning here today. So welcome again. So I'll just share my screen here so you can see the um, research and the beginning. Here we go. Sorry, 1 second. There we go. So, Gaia Journey is where we are together. And there we go. So, together we are in this moment of an inhale. Throughout the journey, we've been using inhale and exhale as a way to really move through. So, for many of us, there has been uh, a lot of intense feelings in this time of disruption. So, in any moment of disruption, there might be grief, there might be any kinds of anger, frustration, and there may also be joy. There may be an experience of coming together in a new way, in a new community. So, that is all happening for us, and we are all in it together. So, the process for moving through that is being able to do an inhale and an exhale. Um, so the inhale and the exhale that's happening here throughout our journey is really this is just kind of an overview of the whole, but that kind of blue thread of the inhale and exhale is when we are able to inhale, we're connecting with the overarching global community. And when we're exhaling, we're actually moving back out into our own places and spaces, into our own selves and our contexts, and really just raising our own awareness about what's actually going on, so that we can then begin to make change. There's also often a kind of desire to jump to action. And you'll notice that in this journey, we start with the staying with, and then as we move through, we begin to actually go into the moving with. But we're still here in that beginning phase of staying with. So, really, in the sense making phase, in the connecting to the feeling, in the turning towards and staying open. And then we'll move into a deeper resonance. And this conversation is actually the beginning of being able to do that, that dropping in together through the inhale and exhale. So we'll share more about this, but we're here in the April 10th moment, where we're in staying with deep listening and dialogue with ourselves and with each other. And we'll move through the rest of the journey in the inhales on April 24th, May 8th, the dates that you see here, and the exhales as you continue to go back out into your communities, using a lot of the tools that we're sharing on GaiaJourney.org site. Many people have been using social solidarity circles already, and we've seen some of your stories that you shared on social media with hashtag GaiaJourney. So you can see some of those as well. And as we move in with deep resonance and the moving with portions, we'll share more tools and more resources to be able to move through together. So some of the survey results have been about holding contradiction. So I mentioned that many of us have a lot of different emotions going on here. We're actually holding that contradiction in ourselves. So the deep connection and immense possibility balanced with feelings of sadness for all people suffering or losing jobs, stability, and risking lives. Many of us are, I think, that bottom one of sad joy. So these are quotes directly from the survey, and just a little touching into the incredible data that came forward. But that we're all holding, in some ways, that contradiction in our current context. So many of us have said all is connected, a lot is broken, and that things can go either way, that we could have more dictatorships or we could have stronger democracies. And that what's really fascinating here is that the impossible now suddenly seems possible. Who would have thought that everything would stop? So just that the impossible is possible. And then our deepened impulse, there's kind of both feelings here of now is really a time for stillness and deep listening. And on the other side, that kind of the contradiction that we're holding is that change is urgently needed, and we need to just stop talking and take action. And the reality around that is that all of that is true, that we need to take action and we will take action. And that part of this, many of us here are change makers and creators and movers, and we're ready to take things to scale. We have ideas that are already in action. And in the same breath of that, before we move to that action, there is a deep sense making that's needed. There's a deep moving into what's really here for us. So I'll send that back over to Otto now, to take us deeper into a framing of our current moment.
Thank you, Antoinette, and hello to everyone from the Boston area. It's so interesting, Antoinette, what you shared from the survey, kind of some of the findings, kind of from what you shared with us. So the holding the contradictions, right? All the contradictions that we feel in our emotions, sadness and joy, that we experience in our context. All is connected, a lot is broken. And this general feeling that things could go either way. So we could move towards more dictatorships, and that's what we are seeing actually. And we could move into stronger civic engagements, co-creativity, and democracy. And that's what we are seeing too. And that's certainly kind of feeling these contradictory forces, I'm sure, is something you experience in your own context. Likewise, we all do. And when you double click on that and just kind of, so that's kind of the current moment, but if we double click on that and just look at the last year or two, kind of the last couple of years or so, in my experience, I have met an increasing number of people, kind of from government, from business, from communities, from international organizations, from change makers on a grassroots level, that all basically shared the same fundamental feeling that best can be described or summarized with the following three statements. One, our system is not sustainable. We are hitting the wall. It's not only broken, the system, but it's hitting the wall and is about to collapse. And that process already, is underway. Two, I want to be, so that's kind of what we collectively do. But then on a personal level, most people would say, I want to be part of a different story. A story that's a different story of the future. I want to put my work and life kind of into that different story of the future. And three, I don't know how. So if you take these three things together, that's really, I believe, our current moment. That we, on the one hand, collectively create results that almost no one wants. Biodiversity loss, climate change, all the, areas of inequality and social polarization. And yet, collectively, that's exactly what we keep doing. And that's why, just for kind of framing today's conversation, I want to quickly share another image here that, might help us in this conversation. And that's, of course, systems thinking, right? So we need to, and all systems thinking starts with this distinction between symptoms at the top and root issues kind of below the waterline. And when we apply that to the current situation, kind of we see, over 1.5 million cases, we're approaching 100,000 deaths today. And the reactive response of that is of course necessary, but it's only really addressing the symptoms here is, increasing the capacity for ICUs, for a lock, and, putting basically, most of the majority of mankind under lockdown conditions. But then when we move to the deeper structural issues, that's also kind of what we see going on right now, on the epidemiology side, kind of the testing, building the capacity for testing, tracing, isolating, distancing. And then on a deeper level, of course, addressing a shift in our paradigms of thought from one that's based on separation to another one that's based on interconnection. Interconnection means that I'm beginning to realize how my own behavior is actually impacting what's happening here in terms of the results that we collectively enact. And then on the deepest level, what we also see is kind of a deeper shift of the inner place from which we operate. And I came across kind of this kind of deepest, this kind of source dimension, the deepest sources kind of our energy, of our, of our actions, of our creativity. I became aware of this dimension first time when I talked to Bill O'Brien, the late CEO of Hanover Insurance, who summarized his many years, right, leading transformational change as a CEO with the following line. The success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. So the success of what I do as a change maker depends on the inner place from that I operate. And last time, we related that inner place to these three capacities, to the opening of the mind, curiosity, the opening of the heart, compassion, and the opening of the will. And we also last time realized that this is really hard to do, particularly in a moment of disruption, right? So where, often we are thrown into a freeze reaction, which is really a reaction that tries to protect, a freeze reaction of the mind, of the heart, of the will, which makes us act on ignorance, hate, and fear. So talking about these contradictory forces, that's of course another dimension that we can experience there, and that comes into play. So, and that's kind of how we deal with this source level here. What inspires me about the current situation is that we can see the beginnings of aligning all these four levels of change, which means that we are beginning to look at the results that we collectively enact by changing kind of some of these structural systems, right? So that, organize and hold and shape our collective behavior. By changing and expanding our paradigm from separation to interconnectedness, seeing the connections, seeing kind of how we all kind of interconnect, and shifting the inner place on that we operate from an ecosystem awareness to an ecosystem awareness. I described that a little bit in the blog that I published this week, and Kelvy, Kelvy Bird, kind of our colleague and co-founder of the Presencing Institute, she created kind of this image. So if we do that, if we flattening the curve, which is what we do in most communities now, if we do that, it requires us to look at this, to look at this, and also look at how our own behavior is contributing to these collective results. So we go through a process of this, a process of bending the beam of collective observation back onto ourselves. So bending the beam of our own attention back onto ourselves, both in terms of our individual behavior, but also in terms of our collective behavior. And when that happens, right, so when we are able to connect and interconnect all four of these levels, then anything is possible. And then, in fact, we are shifting, flattening, bending the curve, which is what we do. And it is an amazing behavior that on a level of scale that's unprecedented. And it allows us to realize that if we can do it in this case, we can do it on anything that we as a community put our mind on. And to do that, to make that happen, and to cultivate all these kind of little communities where we begin to act kind of from this gesture, from a collective awareness, that's really where I believe the possibility lies, and where we need a global movement, right? That's already there, becoming a lot more stronger. And that's really, part of the intention that we try to be in service of by supporting the GAIA journey that is just at the very beginning. It's just beginning to unfold. Antoinette.
Thank you, Otto, for really just bringing our awareness to that larger collective and what's possible in our global movement. Before we introduce our guest, we thought we would take a pause, a moment of stillness to connect back in and perhaps begin that process of bending the beam back, really letting ourselves come into an awareness of what is actually happening here and now in this body, this human body, in maybe our own home body, on our earth body, as one of our colleagues, Arawana Hayashi, talks about. So the invitation, if you can get your feet flat on the ground, if that feels possible for you, you can do that. Find a comfortable seat. Just tune into the breath. Just notice where your breath is today, right now. And as we begin to turn our attention to the breath, does it change? You can lower your gaze or close your eyes. And as you connect into this body, often we begin to notice the front of the body first. And also turning the attention to the back of the body, perhaps feeling a sense of uplift in the spine and connection to the earth beneath us. And a connection to our hearts. Just feeling the heart space and knowing that this one heartbeat is also deeply connected to any beings that you may be in close proximity but also uh, to the 1,000 of us that are sitting here together, somehow connected through a screen, through subtle webs of connection we may not even see on a regular basis. And sending heart energy from our hearts out to each and every one of us in this moment, and the more than 5,000 of us who are gathering throughout the next 14 hours. And then out beyond that to all those affected and impacted, and all beings. Just noticing the capacity of the heart and the connection up to sky through the crown of the head, the possibility, the feeling of the great expanse above us. And you can return your energy back to the screen and to each other and to this next moment, which Otto will introduce us into.
Thank you, Antoinette. So it's my great pleasure and privilege to introduce you to our speaker for today's sessions, Vandana Shiva. Vandana, needless to say, many of you will be familiar with her work, but she is a scholar, environmental activist, food sovereignty advocate, and one of the leading figures of the anti-globalization movement, particularly around de-globalizing our food systems, which of course are central kind of to everything we talk about in terms of our health and the planetary health situation. I want to, before I turn with the first question to you, Vandana, I want to start with two short quotes from your recent blog post on the corona situation, titled "One Planet, One Health, Connected Through Biodiversity," and which you find on the GAIA website, which is posted there, and we'll also share the link in the follow-up email that will go on tomorrow. Vandana writes, "New diseases are being created because a globalized, industrialized, inefficient food and agricultural model is invading into the ecological habitat of other species and manipulating animals and plants with no respect for their integrity and their health. The illusion of the earth and her beings as raw material to be exploited for profits is creating one world connected through disease. The corona crisis creates a new opportunity to make a paradigm shift from a mechanistic industrial age of separation, domination, greed, and disease to the age of Gaia, of a planetary civilization based on planetary consciousness, that we are one Earth family, that our health is one health rooted in ecological interconnectedness, diversity, regeneration, and harmony. Thank you, Vandana, for the inspiration you have been giving through your words, through your books, and also kind of through your grassroots activities for many years, for many decades, to so many of us. And I would like to invite you to maybe start off with sharing with us a little bit about the context. So what was it that, what was a turning point maybe in your own life where you saw something that helped you to wake up, to clarify what it is, what it is that you really want to do with the rest of your life? What were some of these, maybe one or two of your formative experiences in the early parts of your life? Vandana?
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly now. Thank you.
So, the early part of my life, I grew up in the forests of the Himalaya. My father was a forest conservator. And I just imagined forever every forest I'd walked, every stream I'd swum in would be around. Unfortunately, when just before going to Canada for my PhD in the foundations of quantum theory, I trekked and I found a forest gone and the stream had become a trickle. That's my first wake-up call. And then I joined the movement of women to protect the trees through the Chipko movement, which means to hug. And I'm waiting for when we'll be able to hug each other and hug the earth and do a Chipko for the future of oneness. My second wake-up call was 84. I had studied my MSc honors in physics and particle physics in Punjab. By 84, it was a land at war. And this is where the Green Revolution experiment with chemicals was first applied. And I said, why do 30,000 people have to be killed? Something's wrong. And I asked the UN, can I study what's going on? Because I was working for a program on conflicts over resources for them. And I did the book called The Violence of the Green Revolution, woke up to how poisons and chemicals that came from war were driving our agriculture. And I made a commitment then I would make my life a study of nonviolence in farming and the practice of nonviolent farming. And I've done that since 84. And the next wake-up call was 3 years later, when the poison makers, I call them the poison cartel, said now they weren't making enough money from poisons and they needed to own the seed through patents, through a global treaty, GATT, through intellectual property rights agreements. But I said, but you don't make life. You can't take patents on life. You can't take patents on seed. And just that moral outrage and the chill of a handful of people wanting to control life on Earth started me on my journey to save seeds and biodiversity. And every turn has been new learning of our oneness, our interconnectedness, of the amazing diversity on this planet, and how the illusion of scarcity is being constructed for greed and extraction.
So you have been, Vandana, you have been using the term biopiracy. So what does that mean? And can you share a little bit more of the context? Because I don't think that all of us are really aware of what is actually the impact of the current food system that we have, say, for example, on farmers in India, on farmers in other areas of the world. So biopiracy, what do you mean with that term?
I actually wrote a book to say, if you allow patenting of life, what's going to happen? After all, the chemical industry has no idea about the fact that plants can be healing, that seeds can be climate resilient, tolerate salt, tolerate floods. Or our ancient wheats don't give gluten allergy, that we can breed rices that are aromatic, like the famous basmati from my valley. And then the biopiracy really started to happen. In 84, the second wake up was linked to Punjab, the Bhopal disaster, where a pesticide plant had leaked in the city of Bhopal. Thousands were killed. And I took neem, which is an ancient Indian pest control agent, a tree that grows everywhere, called the free tree. I said, no more Bhopals. Let's plant a neem. 10 years later, I find it is patented. And that was the first case of biopiracy. We had to fight that case for 11 years. I mobilized signatures. 100,000 people from India filed a case in the European Patent Office. 11 years later, we won. We took on the US government and a big chemical company called W.R. Grace. A few years later, a Texas company claimed to have invented the aroma of our rice. This was the biopiracy of basmati. And then Monsanto found a market in gluten allergies. Every third Westerner who's eating industrial food has gluten allergies. These are not because of wheat, they're because of a particular kind of wheat and the industrial processing of uniformity. So I challenged that and they had to drop that patent, but we found there are 5,000 biopiracy patents on our healing plants. There are 1,500 patents on climate resilient seeds. So biopiracy is the way the old chemical companies want to have a monopoly of life. And I have seen this, I've called this the empire over life. After all, cotton became the basis of the empire of cotton, which created the British Empire, East India Company, and everything we know. But the empire of life is based on the illusion that you're creating life. You can't, so you first pirate from life itself. That's the first level of biopiracy. Second, because it's indigenous cultures who know that neem can control pests, that cinchona bark can give you quinine, which is the basis of this drug that's making the big news of hydroxychloroquine. All of these issues are really indigenous knowledge. So any patent on living systems and the knowledge related to it is biopiracy. And it is the only way corporate monopolies can grow. Or if we keep the knowledge and the biodiversity in common hands, which is what I've done with seed, created through the Navdanya movement, and people can go to the website of navdanya.org. We've created 150 community seed banks. Farmers can jump back after a drought, after a cyclone, and nutritious foods that have gone out, the millets. So basically, it's reclaiming life as a commons.
Reclaiming the life of the commons. So, Vandana, having been so in the center of this struggle for the past years and decades, where do you see us today? So I took your last remarks as an indication that progress has been made, but probably not enough. And when you look at the next 10 years, kind of the 2030 agenda, what do you think is necessary? And also, a lot of the biopiracy and the patents, seems to also be relate to our fundamental property rights, right? So we have, state-based property rights, we have private property rights, but the commons-based property rights, I think, is a third category that's not enough developed, and that really needs to be where we need a lot more vehicles really to deal to protect and to regenerate our commons on all levels of societal life. What is your take on that? So what with the view of on the next decade, what's the change ahead that in your view really needed to happen, and that kind of the global movement that we all feel being part of, and that's beginning to further take shape, should put its eye on?
Well, just first a short remark on the issue of the commons and private property rights. Commons is the way life has been organized. Even England had to have big 3 centuries of struggles to defend the commons and against the enclosures of the commons. Every indigenous struggle in the world, in the Amazon, in Africa, is about the defense of the commons, not as property, but as the earth of which we are a part. So commons has a long history, and the laws around it as common law have a very long history. It's just the short 500 years of colonialism and that has created the privatization and enclosures, and the seed issue, the biodiversity issue, the biopiracy issue is one. But when you ask, where do I see us going? I think if we give more strength to the ecosystem view that we are one earth family and organize around that, develop our consciousness around it, we will create new commons, we'll have better capacity to care and much more abundance to share. And if you notice right now, the only places where the food is available to people is where local food systems were created. Community supported agriculture was created. Otherwise, the supermarket shelves are empty. The entire food chain has collapsed. But as you read in that quotation from my blog, the crisis we are in is related to a mechanistic, militaristic property mindset. And it is actually using the crisis to get more concentrated. Over the last few years, I have been observing how the digital robber barons are combining with the biotech industry, and the GMOs are combining with the chemical industries, the buyers, which are now the Monsantos, and they're combining with the information technologies to very, very rapid level. So we could have a deeper mechanistic fragmentation, bigger ego in the hands of 5 billionaires, power and total control, surveillance systems, annihilation of every biodiversity, worse, creating throwaway people. Many of them have said the future is artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence means we need nobody else for work. Our algorithms will do it all. Sadly, that means 99% humanity will be useless and throw away. And I don't want this crisis to become a rehearsal for large numbers of throwaway people. That's where our deep democratic spirit must come back after the crisis is over, after the isolation is over, to say these are foundational rights. As Earth family, these are foundational rights as democracy, as free people. Because what I'm watching is, while people's consciousness is growing for another world, there's a new colonization. You know, coming from a third world country, you recognize colonization. You have to be through it to know when it's happening. And our land was colonized, our biodiversity was colonized, our knowledge was colonized through biopiracy. But the new colonization is the bodies and minds of every individual. Our minds are becoming minds of data. That's being mined to then manipulate our behavior. And if we allow that stage to be entered, there won't be life, there won't be freedom, there won't be a future.
The new colonization is the poisoning of our minds, the mind of data. Thank you, Vandana. We'll pause here and take a little moment of reflection that Antoinette will lead us into. We will, allow you to reflect a little bit on what you heard and connect that with your own experience individually and in breakout groups, and then continue the conversation with you the moment we return from the breakout groups. Antoinette?
Wow. Thank you, Vandana. Thank you, Otto. There's quite a bit alive for me right now, and I'm sure for the many, many, many of us who are watching and with this conversation right now. So the invitation for us before we continue the conversation is to begin that process of reflection, or continue the process of reflection. So if you have a journal nearby or a piece of paper, you can take a pen and paper and really just move what's going on up here, what's coming up in the body, and start to move it out through putting pen to paper. And what is coming alive for you now is the question you can just jot down. So, absolutely beautiful thoughts and concepts have been shared, and really just deconstructing some of what we may think we know. So as you just jot some notes down, Tony will play some music for us. And just to give you a sense of where we're going, we'll jot some notes down, we'll hear some music, we'll turn to each other in small groups, and we'll come back to harvest and hear a bit more from Vandana and Otto before we close. So, what is alive for you now? Wow, Tony, thank you. Absolutely beautiful. So just noticing what has been coming up for each of us, thinking back to Vandana's words, recognizing that, as Otto shared earlier, thinking just some of the pieces that are coming back up for me are thinking about food, that we are all touched by the food systems. And today I didn't get my grocery order yesterday, and I'm thinking about where is that going to come from, and knowing that this concept of food security, that this is something that is touching all of us globally, and the work that Vandana has been doing over decades to be able to create that kind of security and create a global movement from that, that we each play a part in that. So, as we consider our own individual actions and how that connects up to the global movements that we see and understand are happening, and what is needed of us now, we'll turn into breakout rooms and continue the conversation. And as you go into those breakouts, we will have time to harvest afterwards. Not necessarily the food that I need in the kitchen right now, but we'll harvest some thoughts and insights and questions that we all may have as a community. So enjoy your time in breakouts, and we'll see you back here in about 15 minutes. And don't forget to introduce yourselves. Name, where you're coming from, what's going on. Enjoy.
Hello.
Everybody roll back in. Not all there yet, but welcoming people back. As we continue to just wait for everyone to get back in, we are here in each room, there are about 200 people. So in your Zoom room, you might see your Zoom room and the number of your Zoom room. In each room, there are about 200 to 250 people. And then there are also a few hundred on live stream as well. So we're kind of holding all of these rooms and all of these people in our community together. So that is what is happening at that moment, is the rolling back of everyone back into the main session and connecting across all of our channels. So welcoming everyone back. And if you would like, you can start typing into the chat just anything that was an insight that came up for you as we continue to welcome people back. Okay, sounds like we are all here. So welcome back to everybody. Okay, welcoming everybody back. So welcome, welcome, welcome. What we'll do now is we will move to be able to hear everybody. I talked about a harvest. That's our term for just being able to pick out a few comments that we heard. If you have any insights or thoughts that came up in your breakouts, then you can type them into the chat in your room. And at least the few hundred who are in there will be able to see that. If you would like to share using the audio and visual capabilities, you can share that across the entirety of our Zoom rooms by clicking onto the participants button and clicking the raise hand function. In that, by using that raise hand function, we'll be able to see you and bring your voice in to this conversation. So if you would like to share that way, please feel free to use the blue hand to raise your virtual hand for us to see, and we will bring you in now.
Can be sharing about your experience, and can be also questions you may have for Vandana.
I think Carmen Garcia has raised her hand.
Yes, I was very touched when you, Vandana, you said about you talked about our minds, the mind of data. And I've been reflecting very much about how we are all creating all this situation together, and how much we need to understand and learn how we create reality with our minds. And these days, being at home, I have a lot of time to go very deeper to things that I don't have time normally. And I came back to A Course of Miracles, and because I realized that we in Spain now is the Holy Week, and I was curious because is this quarantine, and it is this quarantine also in this time in the year. So I found it so curious that we are all at home in this time, celebrating these days, these holy days, in a very quiet and inside way, inwards way. And how, as I'm by myself, how my whole life in these weeks has been passing through me. So I really, I feel this calling of coming together with people from different paths, like quantic science and mysticism and many other paths, neuroscience, and to come together and understand how our minds work. So it's this yearning really to go through this. So when you say these minds of that, they really touched me I felt so that it is so easy for me to just go lost in that. So yeah, thanks. Thank you. And I feel a lot of feelings, really, like pain and sadness, a deep sadness for what we have done to life. And then at the same time, when I hear Antonio, it was like this amazing love for all of us and for life. So it's this, again, this mix of this duality that we live in. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Carmen. That was really touching in a lot of different ways. And I just want to be able to bring in more voices. So we'll move to Ellen Rose next.
Before that, can we please make sure that everyone is muted? Because in my Zoom, a lot of people are unmuted.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for hello around the world. I guess the question that I want to pose to the group, or something that I'm working with, is really how do we move from this mindset? I'm in the United States. I've lived here all my life, and the paradigm of hyper-individualism is very strong, and when I come down to where my core needs are and my core survival mechanisms, it's the idea of the commons is so beautiful on one level and so frightening on another, and seems so impossible on another. And so I guess my question is, how do we move from this place of hyper-globalization, hyper-individualism, to a place of really relying on the commons? Like, there's a way that it is separating and condensing and making smaller of our communities. And so it's just interesting to think, how do we condense into this local, regenerative, stable place, while also staying connected to a larger humanity? So those are my questions. Thanks.
A dear friend says we grow in the direction of the questions we ask. So thank you for asking those questions, Ellen, and we'll move to Lena. Channel 3.
Thank you. So it's 1 o'clock in Sydney. I'm in my bed, and I was lucky to see Vandana Shiva in Sydney a couple of years ago, and that inspired me to create a movement and a methodology I call mindful cooking. And it is about connecting people to their food and to themselves, and to really wonder where is their food coming from every time that they're going to eat something, to actually pause and remember, where is my food coming from, and what am I doing, and what am I supporting as I'm eating. Our group was really super interesting because we brought the lens of collective trauma as well in the conversation, and the work of Thomas Hubble, with the idea of understanding how can we better understand people's behavior based on the trauma that they are going through, and how can we help them move out of that freeze and be able to really come back to their body, come back to their awareness on their behavior. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Fantastic. And we'll hear one more voice.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, we
Oh,
do.
great. Okay, great. First of all, it's just wonderful to connect with everybody. I just feel the deep passion in everyone's hearts that are connected on the call. In our group, one of the things that really struck me was the inner place from where we operate from is the necessary ingredient if we're going to have any sustainable change. And I'm aware on a personal level that for personal change to happen, the neuroscientists will tell us that we have to become greater than our environment, greater than our body, and greater than time, which is really what so much of the bottom of the U is about. So we connect to our future self and then act from there. And that requires, as we know, that open heart, open will, open mind, that place of vulnerability. I see from our conversations, there's the potential. How do we do that collectively so that we sense together what's wanting to emerge? And from that place, we actually become greater than our environment, our body, and time, and create from the future that we want to see, and how to support each other in living into that future and acting from that place. Because if we're operating at the level of the environment, then all we're going to be doing is operating in the same systems over and over again and trying to push them to change, as opposed to allowing the change to come through that larger vision.
So I believe this is Ron who was just talking. Thank you for exactly that, that comment, the statement. Yes. So with that, I'll turn it over to Otto, who will say more than yes to that.
Thank you, Ron. I think you said it beautifully, and I'm also really touched by the. So I don't know. We are like somewhere between 1,000, 1,500 people on this call now, and it is interesting. We only heard a few voices, but you begin to feel the whole a little bit, exactly the way you described it, and that's just a very interesting observation that really resonates. And I also, resonated, Ellen, with your question, kind of that you directed to Vandana, which is kind of from hyperglobalization to the commons, kind of what, how is that actually possible? And whether, Vandana, you can give us any more guidance on that. And I also really want to turn it over to you for any closing reflections that you may have on all the comments and conversations that you heard. Vandana?
The point is, what world we build. And I think we need to be focusing on smaller ecological footprint with deep awareness of the interconnected crises of the planet and our health. And just creating more possibilities for the human spirit. Because sadly, we've lived in fossil slavery for 300 years. And we need to reinvent ourselves beyond the fossil age, beyond fossilized minds, beyond the fossilized idea of human beings are a redundant species. On the issue of mindful eating, as my blog shows that, there isn't an out there and inside. We are connected. We are connected because food connects us. And food is the nourishment of life, and the commons of life is a commons of food. So mindful eating means not only being mindful about how the food was grown, was it palm oil by cutting down the rainforests of Indonesia, or GM soya grown in burning the Amazon, but mindful in terms of what is it doing to the farmers as the producers? What is it doing to people who are harvesting the food? Today, they can't work. And food is rotting in the farms, and people are going hungry. That link has to be closed. And the final thing I'd like to just reflect on is a bit on the beginning from Antoinette. And while you were going through the period of stillness, I was just thinking, the word yoga is joining. We go in to join outwards. It's not about isolation. And the pranayama, when you're talking about breathing in, be deep. The pranayama, which is about the breath of life, what we say is, so hum, you are, therefore I am. So I think when I talk about the mechanistic idea, I mean the idea of isolation, of separation. My thesis for PhD was on non-separation and non-locality in quantum theory. The quantum world taught us that 100 years ago. Ancient wisdom taught us that over 1,000 of years. We have to reawaken to the new sciences of interconnectedness, to ancient learnings, cultures that have been around for 10,000 years because they didn't mess around with the planet and society. And my last reflection would be, the fact that we must be a meter away from each other is a physical distance. Nothing says it is about fragmenting society further. The word social distance is an inappropriate word for physical separation. Let us treat the physical separation as necessary to deal with this emergency, and meantime think of how through our consciousness, through our collective actions, through reclaiming the commons, we actually bring social cohesion as the basis of the new systems where we don't explode the ego, but we expand ecosystems.
Thank you so much, Vandana, for not only uplifting us kind of to a new perspective, but also for over all these many years embodying these principles, all these principles in your own life. And I think what resonates with me in this session is also how you reconnected this global health pandemic that we are in to the health of the planet, and the health of the planet with our food system, and with that, with each and every one of our lives and decisions that we make on an everyday basis. So that's really also what's happening. There's a whole wave of kind of regenerate kind of the local regenerative farming and around CSA, and I think I know it's already a big part of our community. It will be a much stronger part even going forward, and it's also probably one of the biggest leverage points to really address not only the biodiversity but also the climate challenges that are ahead of us. So thank you for the inspiration you have been providing for us and your generosity. And with that, I want to turn it over to Olaf, who in Berlin has been capturing the process we have been just going through together. Olaf.
Yeah. I don't know what to say. I think you probably just look. I have.
Thank you. So let's just, I think that's exactly the thing to do, Olaf. So let us zoom in here a little bit, and we will kind of now use something that some of you are already familiar with, and others maybe not, which is called social image resonance. We go through a little resonance process, and it's very simple, 2 steps. The first step is, so if you just allow this image that we are looking at, which is mirroring back to us what the whole kind of social field experience that we just went through, if you allow that image to sink in, so that's step 1, we do that for a little moment, and then step 2 is, and as you go through step 1, you begin also to notice the resonance within yourself, and in step 2, then we will share the resonance that we feel and experience by using the sentence structure I see, or I sense, or I feel. Okay? And you then put that into the chat, and we will be reading back a selection of what is coming up then in the chat back to you, so that we all experience the resonance from the process. So step one is just, allow that image, it's individual seeing, and allow that image to sink into your mind and pay attention to the resonance that you experience. Step two, please share in writing by using the chat the resonance that you experience now by using the sentence structures I see, or I sense, or I feel.
So I can add some of the things from the chat I can bring in. I feel not alone. I see a phoenix emerging from a fire. I feel the power of destruction and control. I sense the importance of slowing down to tend to the urgency. The need of emerging from fear to hope and unity. Black hole. I see a jail of the mind dissolving.
I see the power of an exploding star turning into wings of a butterfly. I sense a lot of eagerness, movement that is rising from stillness and knowing that we are connected. I see black chaos in the center giving rise to sparks of regeneration. And I sense reclaiming of life.
I feel a huge expansion. I see a cleansing fire. I sense a wild, beautiful future emerging out of and with contradiction. Explosion of energy into stillness, beauty, sense. I sense the golden part of the image and see sense making and reclaiming life. I see an explosion of possibilities. I see circle waves in a still pond.
I see an atom with wings. I feel imagine. I feel expansion. I see darkness and the light coming. I see an explosion.
Thank you all for all of the reflections and for what we've all been seeing and sensing together as we begin this journey. An incredible, warm-hearted note of gratitude to Vandana. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was really such a joy to have you and to have your words and wisdom and all that you bring to us. So thank you for sharing with this community. We will continue to bring it forward, bring the work forward. So how will we do that? We have a continued journey over the next 11 weeks together. All of the information as we continue to kind of build the bridge as we walk on it is available on GAIAjourney.org. And there are some things that you can do there. As Vandana said, physical distancing is the more appropriate term, and what we've created is social solidarity circles in order to do that. In order to can maintain that social solidarity that Vandana was speaking of. So if you haven't done that yet with a small group, you can find a small group or create a small group at GAIAjourney.org. You can do it as much or as little as you want. You can have many of them. You can have one of them a week. You can have one a month, whatever works for you. But really as an opportunity to stay connected and keep kind of lifting up those connections that already exist between us, that knowing that relationship, that kind of relational connection is what is going to allow us to bring the type of change we're seeking forward. So connecting in that way. This week during the exhale, you'll be able to connect in hubs as well. So on the GAIAjourney.org site, if there's a topic that you're interested in or a region, a specific area that you have something to be working on together, you can find people who share those interests in the hub section on GAIAjourney.org. And the main thing as you do these practices is to bring a heightened level of awareness to anything that you do. This is not necessarily now I have to take on this practice and try this new thing. It's what's going to be supportive for me now as an individual and allow me to then connect up to the larger global community and continue to kind of bring those learnings together. So whatever you need to do that, for me, I was talking about my own kitchen, sharing any of those, what's going on for you around food security and seeing that as the connective thread, whatever works for you. There are many ways that we are absolutely already connected. So sharing about that, you can use the discussion boards, you can use these tools, and you can also use your own practice. So perhaps that's sitting and meditating in the morning. For me, it's yoga, and Vandana shared the kind of importance of that one, working with the breath. So whatever works for you, maybe it's journaling, whatever else, find your practice, stay attuned to it, and we will see you back here on GAIAjourney.org with hashtag GAIAjourney. We'll see you on the web, and we look forward to our next inhale, but enjoy the exhale of this coming week. Thank you again, Vandana. Thank you, Otto. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day, evening. Rest well. See you soon.
Bye.